So I write longish short stories. So I have an excerpt for you from a short story called Greetings from the New River Gorge, West Virginia. And what you need to know is that it is a woman retrospecting on a moment when she's 11 years old on an adventure with her family, and it's not going very well. They're going apple picking, but they're not there yet. They pulled off at a picnic area for lunch. Okay. Over at the sandwich tent, a woman handed off 3 icy cans of Coca-Cola to her daughter and hoisted 2 heaping plates. The daughter skipped in front of her, 2 ponytails sprouting off the sides of her head, swinging in time. Tessa wants a sandwich, I said. No, I don't. She pushed into my side, barely budging me. Fatty. My father hefted the cooler and closed the hatch. He hooked the bungee cord back under the rear fender to keep it shut. We both know we have enough in here for 2 families. My mother was already spreading a red checked vinyl tablecloth across a picnic table in the far corner of the field. He headed toward her. How about behaving yourselves? We followed him quite quietly as a reply, and Tessa sat in on my mother's side of the bench. As I rounded the table, she hid her hands underneath the wooden lip and stayed quiet as our mother laid out forks and paper plates. A smudgy blot lay across one cheek, where Tessa had rubbed her face. Slow as molasses, my father said as I sat down. He was standing over the grill, careful to make sure all the ash from his cigarette landed inside. Just as he took another deep drag, the purring of an engine rose from the direction we'd come. I lifted myself up partially from my seat to get a better look. The same little white Cessna airplane glided along the ridge and circled. It seemed to hover without effort, taking the air current up under its wings like some large, elegant bird of prey, a red-tailed hawk or an eagle. My father formed his mouth into an O and produced several smoke rings in succession, 3 shadowy hoops, as if he were trying to snare the plane, or at least give it some obstacles to work with. The rings floated and morphed, finally breaking into wisps as the plane streaked behind. The engine's drone faded and dropped off behind a line of trees. I bet there's an airport over there, right over that hill. He snubbed the butt of his cigarette out and sat down beside me, one of those small private type ones. My mother settled a lumpy white mound, a sandwich made of leftover meatloaf, white bread, ketchup, and cheese, onto his plate. I bet if we took that lane the rest of the way, that's what we'd find. My father often did this, gambled over the random possibility of adventure. He would take roads with grass poking up through tire tracks or all mud and ruts just to see where they would end. Sometimes they would lead to the entrance of some grizzled wild man's private property, but generally they turned out to be well-traveled cow paths, blocked-off logging roads, and roads to nothing at all. My mother handed me my sandwich. She watched as my father unfolded the wax paper from his and bit off a hunk and chewed. What? He said, his mouth full. Eat, she said to both of us. I started to unwrap mine. My sandwich had been squished against the inside of the cooler, upturning one half and leaving the other submerged in melting ice. I pressed the bread back down against the grayish meat and tried to flick off the damp, gooey paste stuck to my fingers. The people in front of us, the mom and little girl from the tent and the girl's dad or whoever he was, were almost done with theirs. After they bit into their sandwiches, you could hear the crunchy bits of sourdough crust specking their plates, and the little girl had a happy clown mouth of barbecue sauce around her lips. The girl threw a sweet potato fry to the ground, trying to lure a squirrel out from under a neighboring table. Stop staring at those people, my mother said. I bit and swallowed, the cold lump gradually working its way down my throat and into my stomach. I already told them no, my father said. I took another bite. When I finally had the nerve to look up, she was turning her head back around from the direction where the other family sat. She glanced down toward Tessa, who was swinging her legs and humming to herself. It's a special day, isn't it? You've been good girls. She nodded, more to herself than anyone in particular, and grabbed for the purse at her side. They're probably not too much. She unzipped her wallet. My father settled his sandwich onto his plate and sucked the stubborn bits from between his front teeth. We could share, I said, a little too enthusiastically. As he angled his head down toward me, I immediately regretted speaking up. No, I said. He rapped the pine boards of the table with his fist. Why, my mother said. Because. My mother slammed her wallet back into her purse. A few loose coins flew out and landed in the grass. Closing her eyes, she drew in one long, deep breath and let it out. Tessa had stopped humming and stared down at her plate. We're fine, Daddy. We don't need anything else, I said. My father pushed himself up, almost knocking over our bench, and strode off toward the parking lot. My mother opened her eyes and glanced around the picnic area, but nobody was looking or, if they noticed, cared. The three of us finished in silence as he stood and smoked by the car. We weren't back on the road long before my father smashed his heel into the brake and whipped the car around. I'm going to prove you wrong, he said. Girls, get ready, we're going on an airplane ride. I thought we were going apple picking, she said. We are, he said. Then she hit him, right in the back of the skull. What's wrong with you, she shouted. Get me out of here, get me out. She rattled the door handle as if she were locked inside and wanted to jump. You're crazy, you're driving me crazy. I can still see his face, the way it sunk into itself and darkened, and hers open and red. Tessa wouldn't look at me. Any other time, he would have screamed right back, leapt out of the car, kicked his boot into the hillside, and ripped up a handful of brown leaves and twigs, scattering them to the ditch along with grunts and curses, flailing his hands until he'd worn himself out. But we're a family, he said. I remember the sky was very, very blue at that point of the day, as if a special color of crayon had melted and spread over its whole surface. The kind of sky that's almost tangible in its extreme, one where you're sure all you have to do is reach out and pull yourself into it. I counted the clouds between the blueness, at least a dozen, as he quietly let go. She turned her body away from him and leaned against the door. I'm sorry, she said. He wiped his face and continued on the same road.